Okay. What I know about it, and I don't know if it's all fact, but my understanding, Victor Kabunja is a Kenyan national, was living here, working here. I don't know how many years he was prior to the establishment of Kilimanjaro, but he was an auto mechanic. And if I remember correctly, Toyota was his specialty. Could be wrong. But he worked, there was in that building where Kilimanjaro was housed on the slanting side of the street, that is one whole building. And in the bottom, in the back, which I think now is a CVS or something, it was Ambaselli's auto shop, auto mechanic. And Victor worked there and was well known. A lot of folks actually used him as their mechanic. And I think the owner, I understand the owner offered him a space to maybe have a bar. I don't know if he inquired or what happened, but there was a vacant space. And he said, sure, let's why don't you open a bar? And it would be an African bar. And Victor, I guess, took on to the idea, thought it would be great. Um, and especially, I know that a beer from Kenya is Tusker beer, so he saw it as a possible venue where his friends from Kenya would meet and share beers and, conversation. And it was going to be a very basic kind of bar. But what happened as it opened, and there were very few African-owned spaces in DC at the time. One was the Baobab on 18th Street, a very small space. An Ethiopian, I think, Antro was the manager. You could fit about 20 people in there, but it would always be packed, and it was like a cultural spot where Africans from Francophone Africa and Anglophone Africa, people met there, and it was our little space. It was right, really, across the street from where the Kilimanjaro is. And so what happened when the Kilimanjaro opened, I was explaining it was a time of disco. A lot of disco clubs were open, and that didn't appeal to our Caribbean, African-born folks here. I mean, that music was not the music they knew. And so when Victor opened the spot and there was a room, for music and dancing, it really kind of mushroomed. It took about 3 years for it to really kind of manifest, that people learned about it, came there. They would play, the unique feature of the Kilimanjaro is that they would play like 20 minutes of like R&B, 20 minutes of West African music, and 20 minutes of Caribbean music. It would be a mix, and their DJs were from Sierra Leone and from Africa, from the Caribbean, and it became a Pan-African center. I think it was not planned, it was not visioned, it just kind of happened, what's the word, naturally. It evolved, and people heard about it. So just think of the embassies here and all the people here who are attending Howard and other universities. There's really the entire diaspora is here in Washington. I mean, you can watch, as I used to sit in the Kilimanjaro and I used to watch people come through the door, and I would, I was just learning about my own African self and Caribbean self, and I used to want to figure out the ways I could identify people from different places. Who's from Nigeria? Who's from Guinea? Who's from, Trinidad versus Jamaica? And if you watch body language and, you hear the patois or the accent, you begin, to differentiate. And it was just for me a wonderful learning ground where I got to know all my people in one spot. It was just a beautiful experience. So it became the centerpiece of DC in terms of Pan-African music. Every African and Caribbean artist from the diaspora knew if they came to DC, they could play at the Kilimanjaro. So people like Salif Keita, Baba Mal. I have to go back, but all the early reggae artists came there. At first, they didn't really like reggae because the Rasta community sort of had a bad reputation. Victor and his family didn't feel too good about it. But what happened is in 1981, Bob Marley died. And I did a tribute on the radio, but the next year I wanted to do something public. So I had been going to the Kilimanjaro, had gotten to know them, had been involved in production, and I wanted to have a Bob Marley tribute. I wanted the city to be able to honor Bob. He had passed, and we had never. The show that was supposed to be the next show on his tour was supposed to be D.C. after Pittsburgh. D.C. was the next venue. I had been in New York with the Wailers and Bob at the Madison Square Garden show, the days before. And so, we really had this sense of loss here, but never had a chance to gather and be together. And, because Bob was just such a hero for all of us. So I went to Victor, asked if I could do the Bob Marley tribute on his birthday, and they were a little weary and not too happy, but it really started a whole new era there. And reggae became their lifeblood after that. It was amazing because it was February 6th, 1982. We didn't have it in 81. We had it in 82. And if you've lived in DC long enough, you know if it rains, if it snows, things kind of stop. It snowed that day, and the people filled the place. And it was February 6th, and wintertime, and it just showed how much love and respect and, this whole sense of community grew at the Kilimanjaro. That was my particular involvement with the Kilimanjaro. I think for the next 6 years or 7 or 8 straight, I held the Bob Marley tributes, and it became a tradition. It became a cultural gathering in the winter.
I
I and I Productions, because I kept it cultural. I always began with Nyabingi drummers, which are the foundation um, music and drumming style of the Rastafarian movement. There was poetry. Children were invited. There were balloons. It was a celebration of our hero, and so it became it was quite a thing. Um, and we had mostly local artists. We had a thriving reggae community back then. We had 7, 8, 9. We had an all-female reggae band. There was a lot going on, and a lot of it got to be developed because of the Kilimanjaro. You need a place, you need a space to gather, to build your audience. And I was kind of proud of DC because most cities, reggae has a white audience because reggae was sort of delivered through Chris Blackwell, through the whole rock medium. And so it was delivered to white college kids. And those are the audiences reggae has attracted even up until this day. It was never introduced to the black community. I think it's written that Chris Blackwell didn't think that, we would take on to it. It's a black music sung by black people about, black history and culture. Anyway, he thought we might not like it. Um, so it was never promoted in our community. So I actually really wanted to be this sort of impresario and ambassador for reggae because I had gone to Jamaica. I had experienced it in the Rasta culture and knew that this was ours. And this was important because um, sometimes people won't go to a lecture, read a book, but they'll listen to a song and they'll sing it. And there was such a collective of brothers and sisters, not just Bob Marley, who were singing conscious black music, you know, revolutionary black music. I mean, the perspectives were just so touching because, we don't really sing that way here and about those issues and about Africa so passionately. So Kilimanjaro was my breeding ground. It was perfect. It was perfect timing.
Yeah. Thank you, Dara, for that historical breakdown of Kilimanjaro. But I have to go all the way back. First of all, I was born in D.C. in 1951. And strangely enough, I was born on 18th and California Street,
Wow.
which is right there at Kilimanjaro.
Hmm.
So I had to go back to that. But I've seen a lot of things go on. So Dara actually put it in the proper perspective. I don't want to get too into Kilimanjaro, but I will say that WPFW always was able to publicize all the various different events that were held at Kilimanjaro. You have Tony Carr, you have Vaughn Martin, you had Dara Tompkins, you have Wabe. I mean, there's so many uh, people who played not just reggae music, but Caribbean music that had access to the airways. But then we also had people like Vince Godwin. We had Hodari Ali. I mean, I'm naming some of the ancestors that were at PFW. But all of their networks and shows would allow advertisement for all of the great events that were not only held at Kilimanjaro, but held at any venue, Malcolm X Park, Anacostia Park, and anywhere. So PFW was definitely our go-to spot for getting the word out. Okay, and I had to put that in there because the area that Kilimanjaro was in is we used to call that center city, of DC when I was growing up even. And like I said, I was born right up the street. And when I turned 52, my family moved uptown on 9th and Longfellow Street. But that particular area was a cultural mecca for the black community. So it wasn't just Kilimanjaro. Kilimanjaro is not that far from Malcolm X Park. But you had all of the major theaters that we had. We had the Booker T, we had the Lincoln, we had the Republic. All of them were on U Street. And U Street was the black downtown. So even my mother used to go to hand dancing in the basement of Lincoln Theater way before I was born. So that area was a very, very culturated area. But as Dera said, the whole DMV, Maryland, Virginia, the whole area is loaded with various different people who come from all around the world. So Kilimanjaro, and I have to say this, that I actually worked with Dera doing security for I&I Productions, and people like Muda Baruka, so many giants came through there. But she was one of the major, I call her the reggae ambassador, because Third World, all these groups, Dera had some type of relationship with them, not just in the DMV, but outside of the DMV. That's what makes her an ambassador. And I know Dera's kind of humble, but I speak truth to power, and I watch what's going on. And being born and raised in Banneker City from 1951, even though I'm the youngest in my brother and sister were 8, 9 years older than me. So I saw a lot of things going on as a young person. So let me fast forward, though, into the time when WPFW came into existence, because I'm a Garveyite. As I was telling you earlier, I'm in the UNIA, and I know my cosmic assignment. But if it were not for Freedom Sounds of Odari Ali, which was hosted by Oduno Tariq, I would have never known the UNIA was even alive.
Wow.
That's how I found out about the UNIA on WPFW. So WPFW has always been, as long as it's been in existence, a gateway for us not only to hear about the news and things that's going on from a positive human perspective, but also have been a communications network for all of us. We've had other stations, we've had other stations, but most of them were commercial stations, and we had trials and tribulations. Even Dera knows what I'm talking about. I'm not going to get too into it because she was involved with some of them too. But PFW has always been consistent. So any programs that were done locally, any nonprofit organizations that were doing things had accessibility to the airways. And I think that's very important. You know, we had people like Ambrose Lane, people like the Spear, so many different activists that were on the air on WPFW. I mean, I probably forget some of them, but it's many of them that I like to mention because I believe our ancestors are waiting and watching on us. And as I was telling you earlier, I know some of the politics that go on with Pacifica. My biggest concern is that this particular area, not just Washington, D.C., we're talking Prince George's County, Montgomery County, Northern Virginia, it's sort of like the DMV. But without a WPFW, very few people would know about a lot of things going on. Now, we're here today to celebrate WPFW, but we're in what we call Malcolm X Park. We named that park Malcolm X Park. It's actually Meridian Hill. It has a tremendous bad side of history. I won't go all into that, but the good side of history is most of the African liberation days were held right there. And they were large.
They were major.
They became internationally known. People came from all around the world to African Liberation Days. One of the two of the main ones that I remember, Peter Tosh
and Gil
and Gil Scott.
And
see, so you're talking about people who most of the people on PFW or listen to PFW, they know these personalities, but they were actually able to come here in DC, perform in the park at no cost, and then go amongst the crowd and meet people. Fast forward in the 80s, the elders of Rastafari actually got a contract through, I think, the Smithsonian, and were able to come to Washington, D.C. This was one of the first places that they were able to come. And let's be very real. The OAU was not just established by Kwame Nkrumah, it was established by Emperor Haile Selassie. So I want to say that because sometimes people fail to understand Ethiopia is where it was all done. But anyway, we were able to incubate with the blacks of Washington, D.C., all the people of Washington, D.C., along with the elders of Rastafari. And it was held right there in this park where these elders came up from Ross Sam Brown to Pito,
everybody.
To Ross Marcus, to Sister Bubbles. It's so many. Yeah. And they were able, and Muda Baruka came up with them. So what I'm saying is the cultural unification that took place right here. And even in the Josephine Butler Center. I mean, there's tons of things that have taken place right in here with Josephine Butler, who fought for years for statehood. So what I'm saying to you is that the community of Washington D.C. centered around meeting up outdoors here. Clubs like the Kilimanjaro. There were a few other clubs that popped up here and there, but Kilimanjaro happened to be one of the most worldwide known, and was named Kilimanjaro. So I know I can be long winded. I'm not going to take too much more time, but I just wanted to start the whole process of showing you how all of this is linked. Mm-hmm. There would have been no Kilimanjaro without people like Dera interfacing with Victor. And I actually did some work for them. I actually helped, put posters up for all the events that they were doing, right? So what I'm saying is we all had some kind of ties to one another. Mm-hmm. But without PFW, we wouldn't have had the ability to let people know what's going on, because now, of course, Pacifica is online and it's worldwide. But back in those days, it was like, tune in to PFW to see what's going on, right? Then the Southeast area, and Dera knows what I'm talking about, where we used to have Malcolm X days in Southeast. Mm-hmm. People like Charles Stevenson, EU, Experience Unlimited, all of these groups, whether or not they were reggae, remember ex-slaves that grew up in Southeast? Mm-hmm. They started playing reggae. Gosh. So it was a cultural mecca of the cultural community of Southeast and Northeast and Washington, D.C., connecting with reggae. We got a group now that does reggae, Ross Ledge. Mm-hmm. So he combines Bob Marley's legacy with Chuck Brown's legacy. So you see what I'm saying? It's a coming together of people. So it would be a tremendous loss not to have WPFW, because everybody knows some of the programmers of PFW, no matter whether they're doing art shows or shows on health or shows on culture, like Culture Shack. That's the latest show that I would say mixes reggae with all kinds of other music. But without the legacies of people like Dera, people like Baye, people like Tony Carr, and even Von Martin, even though, all of them who's still rolling. So I'm gonna stop on that point, because I could continue to go on, because I've been blessed to be able to live in this area, experience some of the great things in Malcolm X Park and some of the great works of PFW. And like I said, I wouldn't be in the UNIA if it were not for me listening to PFW one morning at Freedom Sounds and hearing that the Garvey movement was still alive. Now, I did some work with the AAPRP and other groups, but when I found out that Marcus Garvey's movement was still alive, I jumped right on it. And so I'm going to take a pause, because I see Mama Genuine coming in. So I'm going to pause for the cause.
I'm going to have to refer a little bit to my friend Sengore, because I haven't, nobody's asked me this in decades. And so I remember Black Sheep. I remember Sons of His Majesty, Third Eye.
Awareness Ensemble.
Awareness Art Ensemble from Virginia. Infinite was an all-female reggae band. I was their manager for years. And Carl Malcolm.
Yes, Carl Malcolm.
Actually, a lot of folks who were from Jamaica, actually in the early reggae days, lived here, because there was a record shop called Live and Learn on Georgia Avenue that a Rasta owned, and it was he had a label. So Sister Carol, Leroy Smart.
I want to throw Englishman in there.
Oh, Englishman, yeah. I mean, we had a thriving, active reggae community, and it's diminished, over the years. Some of it is because dancehall. So, a lot of our bands were sort of conscious reggae bands, Rasta oriented. And as dancehall took over, and I guess time passed, people moved, people grew up, they had children, families, and so the crowd has thinned down quite a bit. We only have a few bands now. And then also we've lost a lot of the venues that we used to be able to play in, the smaller, venues that were less than, 450 capacity. A lot of those are gone, especially they're gone since COVID. So things are really, really different now. But it was once a thriving community. And WPFW is where we got airplay for reggae. There weren't many other stations. I think
that's right.
HSF in Virginia, I don't know where it was based, but Tom Terrell. There's a white station that played reggae.
Oh, yeah, Tom Terrell.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And but Tom was at PFW too. Yep. But PFW is the voice of the people. It always has been. It's been our alternative to all of the other commercial stations that exist. It's always shown us another way, and in many ways really kind of represented the aspirations, the true aspirations of the people, the masses, the grassroots. And I think that's PFW's value. I don't know what I would do without PFW, especially these days, um, because of the politics of the station, the progressive, global, humanitarian, positive, pro people energy based on the content of the shows and the hosts and the news content. It's been an amazing resource. I wouldn't have made it through any of these current times without WPFW.
Dara did a great job of summarizing some of the groups, but I want to keep it real again though, because PFW has not just been a go-to station for reggae, go-go, jazz. My stepson, Corcoran Hope, who is a master, internationally known now musician who played with Kenny Garrett, is always talked about on PFW. His name is Corcoran Hope. In fact, he'll be here in August, later part of August again, because he's the jazz. He's the resident. What do they call it? Resident jazz artist along with Carter. But I just wanted to say PFW has always been a go-to station for all people with all genres of music. I just happen to be a person that likes all kinds of music, especially when it got a message, and That's how reggae kind of as Dara said, during the 80s, kind of. Dara, when were you on PFW? You were on PFW at one time doing
I wish I
shows.
could remember. Okay,
Yeah,
in the '80s. It was the '80s. It was early '80s. I first came on air with Sandra Ratley and Bob Wisdom and Greg
right,
Tate. They had a show called Sounds Like Thunder,
right.
and Greg Tate was my what can I say? He was my host. Greg used to come to my apartment here in Adams Morgan on a regular basis to learn about Rasta and reggae and the culture. And then he said, "Okay, you need to be on the radio." I was scared of microphones and didn't think that was such a good idea, but he pushed me, and so I joined their show. I think I did an hour, for a certain amount of time, and then I was able to get my own show, and it was called, to go along with the WPFW theme of jazz. My program was called Jazz Music, Jahz, and I only played conscious, political, and solid roots reggae.
So
That's
you
all.
brought back a lot of memories though, because I'm not shy of a mic, as y'all can tell,
No.
but I was. But guess who turned me on to the mic? Another PFW person, Brother Sidrak.
Oh, Sidrak, yeah.
That's who turned me on to the mic. I mean,
Okay, we need.
Sidrak was a DJ that I used to drive
That's right. He
around,
was on the
and then
air.
I
Okay.
started. He had a show on PFW, and I started using, the mic because I'm a poet, and I started talking, and that was it. I found out that it was fun,
Mhm.
but it was because of PFW. So I already told about the history of me getting into UNIA. That came through PFW. So you see here, a born and raised Washingtonian, okay. It's two things that PFW brought into my life that are part of my cosmic assignment. I said I'm in the Garvey movement internationally. I've served as president general in the footsteps of Garvey, but I found out through Freedom Sounds, Hodari Ali on PFW. Now we're talking about something else. Here's Sidrak, who's running around as a DJ, and I learned how to, spit in the mic, so to speak, as they say, through that. So PFW, as me as an individual and from DC, PFW has helped me a lot of ways, find my cosmic assignment.
Go ahead,
Okay,
Dave.
I think you were asking how, I guess, DC became sort of like this mecca for so much energy, and I think it was just DC was known as a black city back in those days. Not now; things have changed drastically. But it was a black city. It was a safe black place because we were in the majority. Because of the population, because of Howard University, because of embassies and a lot of other things that draw people here, it became a place that even people who weren't born here, wanted to come here. I'm from Boston, and I grew up in a city that was predominantly white and extremely racist. Well, the whole country, but I wanted to come to be in a place where I could be human. To be with black people. We had two black doctors in Roxbury. I think we had two black dentists. You didn't see black professionals. You didn't even see black bus drivers because uh, certain groups, ran the Teamsters ran buses and trucks, and you didn't see blacks in certain positions. And when I came here and just saw black people everywhere doing everything, I just was just so lifted, and just knew I wanted to come here to go to Howard. And that's the reason a lot of us come here, because this is the top
Mecca.
level of black education. And so all those things, drew everyone here. This was a real breeding ground for black power here. Because you had so many thinkers, so many professional folks, and it's not just professional; it's a working class also was motivated and moved. There was a movement, back in those days that was national. We woke up. We rejected. I was colored when I was born, and then Negro. I don't know the order, but it was all wrong.
Afro
Right.
American.
Then we were black. That was a big moment. And then finally we did take on African, but hyphenated. But, there was a progression. So that we were, it was a growing consciousness, I think, that drew everybody here. I think the largest population of Ethiopians outside of Ethiopia is here in D.C. When you go home, when you go to Ethiopia, D.C. is like a suburb. You see pictures of the capital. It's so much a part of the society, and I think it's because that community also found a home here. They found a comfort space where they were accepted and saw other people like themselves. So it was a natural breeding ground for progressive black thought. I mean, I think, you know, sometimes we've been confused and blinded, but many of us know and understand our oppression and where it comes from and what it's about. And this became a place you could be that black person you were and be with other like-minded people, kindred spirits. And we built community. We were gonna have a revolution and win. We were. And we did in some ways, and some ways we didn't. But there was an activism that was undeniable and fabulous. I used to say I didn't leave D.C. sometimes because every black thinker, dancer, performer, journalist, writer would come here during the year. Crampton used to be another important institution where you would see not just black performances, but we used to have panels on Pan-Africanism, and you couldn't get in the door. Okay, um, a lot of our it was a think tank for us, and we had many organizations. Some got along, some didn't. I think one time there were 3 or 4 organizations that hosted African Liberation Day, all at the same time. And but there were Black Panthers
African
and Black
liberation.
everything. You
Right.
could walk across Howard. You had to be smart to walk across Howard's campus because you were going to be confronted by the Black Muslims and the Republic of New Africa and the Socialist Party, and you just had to know your position so you knew what to say and how to deal with certain things. You had to be conscious. There was more teaching on the campus than there was in the classrooms. People used to teach. That was a
For real.
term. When you said righteous things, when you spoke truth to power, you were teaching. And I remember on the campus, if a student was killed in Soweto the day before, the next day we'd have a rally. We knew his name, we knew what happened, and we were, standing up for that person's life. So DC was just a place where black people could feel safe in America, and we all came here. And
And we
now we're gone.
stayed.
We stayed, and now we're kind of gone. That's the other half of the story.